The spy turned author John le Carre, whose novels defined the Cold War espionage thriller, has died at the age of 89. Le Carre wrote his first 3 novels while he was a spy working for Britain's intelligence service. His real name was David Cornwell, but he was required to publish under a pseudonym and continued to use le Carre for the rest of his career.
What the hell do you think spies are? Moral philosophers measuring everything they do against the word of God or Karl Marx? They're not.
His most well-known novels include The Spy Who Came In From the Cold and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Le Carre spent much of his life near Land's End in a cliff-top house overlooking the sea. He died after a short illness. For more, I'm joined by Robert Cockburn, a former journalist with The Times and The Observer in London, who met John le Carre in Beirut in the 1980s. What were your impressions of him when you met him in the Middle East in 1982?
Well, I think first off, I was a young freelance in Beirut for BBC as well as the paper. I was surprised he actually spoke with me. He had just published a book and he was in Beirut researching another one. And he wanted access down to the south of Lebanon, which I knew since I was a teenager. And we met at the bar, the journalist's bar, and struck up a good friendship. And he told me what he wanted to do to get right down to the border with Israel, which was a very tricky, potentially dangerous journey. And through my contacts, I fixed him up to travel through the PLO and Al Fatah to get down there, which he did. And he gave me his name and his address and stayed in touch. Said, call me any time, which I didn't do for another 20 years. But what struck me was incredibly charming, very open, mobbed by people, journalists, because he was extremely famous then from the TV series Smiley and the books.
So how did your friendship evolve?
Well, it started there, very much a practical friendship. But it was 20 years later when I was investigating with health officials in Nigeria and Oxford doctors the counterfeit pharmaceutical drug racket, which is a huge criminal, organised crime racket. And at that time, David, this is a real name, David had published the book The Constant Gardener, which was about big pharmaceutical company abuse using poor Africans to test for experimental drugs and harming them. This had many similarities to what we were doing for real in Nigeria and across Africa with fake pharmaceutical drugs. And I gave him a call, and not expecting to get a call back. And the guy phoned back in minutes, and there's David on the line chatting. Took me by surprise. And his memory was phenomenal. And that, I think, certainly it's a tool for a writer or a reporter, Gus. But I said, it's Robert Cockburn. I said, do you remember? And he just snapped back and said, Oasis Bar, Commodore Hotel, West Beirut, 82. I was actually had 2 young children. I was feeding the kids, and I said, I'm here with my young sons just doing tea. They're tiny in high chairs. He said, oh, great, I'm with my grandchildren, my grandsons. So for 20 minutes, we just talked about boys and bringing up boys. I mean, incredibly nice man to chat to. I mean, there were deep complexities to him.
Yeah, his mother left when he was 5 and his father was a con man. Did he ever talk about that and how it shaped him as a person?
No, and I didn't go into that with him, partly because we were doing serious work on the times when we did meet, although chatting about the kids. No, I didn't, but I was aware of it, and I did know that he certainly suffered from depression through his life. And he was, when he was in public, he was very open and approachable, very amenable. But he was also a very, very private man. He spent a lot of time increasingly towards the end of his life in Cornwall, and I think he was happy to do so. But I think there was a sense, the change of the name to John le Carre, a play, I suppose, on the carer, was him evolving. He was a pretty hard spy for Special Branch and MI5, which is domestic spy work in the UK, and then MI6. But there was a part of him which I think he found distasteful as well, which was revealed, and he agreed to it to be revealed in his biography not that long ago, where he was actually reporting on his fellow students, his mates at Oxford University. And I sense as he evolved and found this strong sense of social justice through his work, his novels and his films, maybe that change of name was part of him evolving. He was very good. When we exchanged a lot of information about Africa and big drug companies doing greatly dangerous things there, and talking about the FTA. But he stayed in touch afterwards, and also through Johnny Geller, who was his agent the last 15 years. Always answered immediately, and with his wife Jane, who answered a lot of his emails. Always stayed in touch, and it was an open line. And when we were under intense pressure, this is dangerous stuff that our colleagues in Africa were doing, and brilliantly filmed, I will point out, by a Sydney filmmaker, Elizabeth Tadich, who for our film, The Malaria Parasites, the documentary I was making, Lizzie did some great work in Africa, some really dangerous stuff for us. And at the time, John gave great moral support at a tough time for all of us. It was GlaxoSmithKline we investigated and busted open on a cover-up. And he gave us access. His film, of course, was The Constant Gardener. At that time, he was just signing contracts with Rachel Weitz and Ray Fiennes. And he would take he would take calls from me in Italy while he actually had Rachel and Rafe there. You know, so I'll just take some time out. I think because we had a very strong interest, and that was actually around work. But he said he fixed with Universal that we could have any access and use to his film The Constant Gardener for our documentary. Privately, a hugely generous man, but I think always coming to terms with that part